Good morning, everybody. Just act like it's the first time. Good morning. Several years ago, Lene took this picture of me in the backyard playing with the kids. And whenever I saw the picture, I kind of had to do a double take. And the reason was that over the previous 7 or 8 years, I had gained some weight. I had gained 30 pounds. I'd gone from between 165 and 70 whenever we moved here to like between 195 and 200. And in my mind, that weight was evenly distributed across my entire body. In my mind, I was still proportioned the same way, but I was just a little bit bigger version of me, which was fine with me. I always wanted to be a little bigger than I was because I was a thin guy, growing up and through high school. And so when I looked at this picture, what I saw is that 30 pounds was evenly distributed right here. And so I had a beer belly, and I didn't even drink beer. I had the fat without the fun. And so I looked at that picture, and it looked like one of those before pictures that you see in these fitness magazines when somebody goes on a workout plan. You see the before picture and you see the after picture. My problem was that I didn't have an after picture. I only had the before picture. And so I had the before picture. I just needed the after picture. And so I had been watching this infomercial on television for P90X. In fact, and this is absolutely true, I had recorded the infomercial on television, and when Lene and the kids would go to bed, I would just turn on the infomercial, the P90X, and I would see the befores and afters. And I'd been watching this for a little while, and no matter how many times I watched it, my body did not change, not at all. I couldn't tell any difference in watching the infomercial. So once I saw the picture, I made a decision, and my decision was that I was gonna actually pull the trigger. I was going to order P90X, and I was going to do this program. So I ordered the program, and when it came in the mail, I took it upstairs to my music room where I have some space on the floor up there. And included in the packet was this fitness test. And the purpose of the fitness test is to determine whether you are healthy enough to go through the program. Now, I don't know how long the fitness test is because I couldn't finish the fitness test. I did like 10 minutes, and I felt like I was going to literally collapse. And so I went downstairs, and I reclined in my recliner, and I was really worried about myself. And Lene came in, and she looked at me, and she says, "You don't look good at all." And I said, thank you very much. I said, "No, I don't feel good." And she said, "Are you okay?" I said, no, I'm not okay. And she said, "Well, what's wrong?" And see, I watched this medical show on television from the 70s. It's this show called Emergency. And me and my boys, we love to watch the show at night as we're winding down to go to bed. And so I know all of the, not to get above your heads or anything, but I know all the medical terminology to use. And so I began to use this terminology, and I told her, I said, I feel like I'm having a sinking episode. I feel like I am diaphoretic. That means I'm sweating profusely. I have tachycardia. That's because my heart is beating fast, and I feel faint. I feel like I'm going to, my two favorite things, pass out or get sick, throw up. And if you were here last week, you know that already. But so she kept coming in periodically, every 4 or 5 minutes, she's coming in. "Are you okay?" And I was, no, I'm not. And I could just, I had this panic thing going on too, because I could just envision Dr. Brackett on Emergency if Johnny and Roy, the paramedics, had been on the biophone to Rampart Hospital, Dr. Brackett would have probably said, "I think this is a probable MI." Now, I don't know what an MI is, but it's a bad thing. It's where they take the paddles out and they shock you, and so I was just, I had all this anxiety, and I was really feeling bad. And after a couple hours, my vital signs, as far as I know, pretty much returned to normal. And so I decided that what I would do is that I would just take a small chunk at a time, like 5 minutes. I'd just do like 5 minutes at a time. So the next day, I did 5 minutes. Now, 5 minutes is the warm-up, okay? And after the warm-up, I remember laying on the floor, staring at the ceiling, thinking, I can't believe, how did I get this way? How did I get so incredibly out of shape? I mean, 20 years of inactivity could not possibly do this much damage. And so I just, I couldn't believe how out of shape I was. But I did the 5 minutes the first day. I did the 5 minutes the second day. Third day, I did like 2 minutes of the actual workout, and then it was amazing to me after that. I did the supplements, I did the shakes and protein shakes and all of that. And 2 weeks in, I'm in my mind, I'm killing it. I'm doing half a workout every day, and then at week 3, I started to do the full workout on some of the workouts, and those workouts were an hour long. And I built up after like week 3. I was able to do every single workout except one, and this was the plyometrics workout. And plyometrics is jump training. And on this particular DVD, there was a guy that was in the back, and I hated that guy. I hated him because he was getting like 2 feet of air, 2.5 feet of air. I mean, the feet were like here whenever he would jump. And I was getting like 6 inches of air. And I could not relate to him at all. I could not imagine in my fondest, imagination of the future, me ever clearing 2 feet like this guy was doing. But there was one guy that I could relate to. He was kind of up front. And I watched him because he was doing the jump training, and I'm not making this up, on one leg. He had one good leg, and the other leg was a prosthetic leg. And I figured if that guy could do 1 hour of plyometrics on one leg, that eventually I could work up to doing 1 hour on 2 legs. So I would watch him, and I would try to do, what he was doing. And so I was able to relate to him. And then I finished the program, but it was like week 5 maybe before I was able to complete the plyometrics. And I remember the day, that was my goal. I just want to be able to do an hour of the jump training. And I remember that day, my workout partner, Danny, said, I've got to leave early today. He always had to leave early on the plyometrics day. And so he had to leave early that day. And so I was left there by myself, and there was nobody to share this with, but I finished the workout on that day. And I remember whenever I finished that workout, I jumped up, hands in the air, and there was nobody there but me. And I was just celebrating. Yes, I'm great. Yes, I was able to do the plyometrics workout. And so I finished that, and after 12 weeks, I had lost every one of those pounds, all 30 pounds. I had gone from like right at 200 to 170. And I was so glad. I was finally able to take that after picture. And there was something, though, that happened, that last day when I finished the program, when I was able to conquer that goal that I had for myself, there was something that happened to me that day. And there is it's this thing that happens to us whenever we conquer our challenges in life. And even though we are not talking in this series, even though we're not talking about physical things, physical fitness goals or anything of that nature, we're talking about the spiritual things. Even though that's the case, the principle is still the same. And I want to talk about that today. We're wrapping up our Summit Challenge series, and today is just simply the summit. What happens to us when we stand on the summit of our challenge? Now, there is a word that I want us to get very familiar with today, because this is really what happens to us whenever we stand on that summit, and it's this word, perspective. And perspective is so incredibly important to us. And it's so important whenever we stand on that summit because our perspective changes. And in this life, perspective is everything. It's everything. Perspective is what causes us to make our next move. Perspective determines which direction we're going to move. It determines what our next move is going to be. In every situation, our perspective is so incredibly important. I want to take a look at a picture today, and we're going to put this up on the other screens. And I chose this picture because, to me, this picture symbolizes something. It symbolizes several things. It symbolizes things that I believe happen to us whenever we stand on that summit. And the first thing I want you to notice about the picture is if you look off into the distance, you can see things that you never have seen before. When you stand on your summit, you can see things you've never seen before. And off in the distance, I don't know how far that is, that distant mountain peak, but it could be 10 miles, 20 miles. You can see. You may not be there yet, but at least you can see it. You may not be there, but you can see where you're going. But the most important thing, and I'm starting with this because I believe it is the most important thing. The most important thing that happens to you when you stand on the summit of whatever your particular challenge is, whether it's anger or fear or some sin or some temptation or some weakness that you have in your life, no matter what that is, when you stand on that summit, when you have that accomplishment under your feet, you find out who you are. Your perspective about who you are changes. Whenever I finished that workout plan, I knew that I had it in me to do that challenge. I knew that I could be a fit person. When I finished that program, I did 2 more rounds after that, but when I finished that program, I could do push-ups for days. I could do 60 push-ups in 60 seconds. I mean, I was stronger than I had ever been in my life. I was more fit than I had ever been in my entire life, and it changed me. It changed how I viewed myself. And when you stand on the summit of whatever your challenge is, whatever your spiritual challenge is, it changes how you view yourself. What God already knew about you before that you did not know about yourself, now you know. You know who you are. You know that from this day on, you know you are a mountain climber. You are a person who can reach the summit. It changes the way you view yourself, and you are a mountain climber. And I want to talk about what this is that God sees us as. What kind of person God sees us as. And I'm going to start with the Apostle John today in 1 John. He says, and this is the Message version, says, "But friends, that's exactly who we are, children of God, and that's only the beginning." It's only the beginning. Who knows how we'll end up? What we know is that when Christ is openly revealed, we'll see him, and in seeing him, become like him. When you reach that peak, when you reach that summit, you know that you did not get there on your own. You know that it was Christ who carried you to that place. And when you get there, when you get to that summit, Christ is revealed. He's revealed in your situation, but he is also revealed in you. And when we see him, we become like him. This is Romans. This is the Apostle Paul. And he says, for those, and I love the scripture because it says it all. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Do you get that? This is what God is bringing us to. This is what God knows about us that some of us, or most of us, don't yet know about ourselves. And it's this, that he has predestined us to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he, Jesus, might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. That's what he's doing in us. He is conforming us to his image, the Son of the living God. That's very important. And just as Christ has overcome every obstacle, and we'll see that in just a minute, just as he has overcome every obstacle, we become that type of person that we, with Christ in us, can overcome. We can be overcomers and victorious in every situation, just as Christ was. Okay, let's go to the next scripture in Hebrews. Therefore, since we have a great high priest, and I put this in here because I wanted us to be comforted. If you are struggling with whatever it is that your mountain is, I want you to be comforted by the scripture. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. Get that. We do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have the one who has been tempted. He has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet, he did not sin. This is great news for us. We don't have a high priest that can't identify with us. We have someone that we can identify with, just like I identified with that guy who had one leg, we can identify with him. He can identify with us. He has been tempted in all the things that we are tempted in, yet without sin. He was able to make the summit every single time. He was able to conquer every obstacle every single time, and he understands us. He sympathizes with us. He empathizes with us because he's been there. He knows every weakness. He knows every sin. He knows every temptation, and he is our high priest. So it says, let us then approach God's throne of grace, and I love this, his throne of grace with confidence. Some versions say, let us boldly go. Let us boldly go before the throne of grace so that we may be able to receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. This is so important for us to understand that the throne that God sits on is a throne of grace. It is favor that we do not deserve. It is kindness that we do not deserve. It is forgiveness that we do not deserve. It is power and help that we do not deserve. And we come to him in our time of need. And we don't have to be bashful about approaching the throne of grace. We can approach his throne with full confidence, knowing that it is a throne of grace. With full confidence, knowing that our high priest, the one who sits in judgment of us, the only one, by the way, that sits in judgment of us, is one who has been tempted in every way that we are, and he empathizes with us. I love it. So, let's take a look at this picture again. I want you to see something else. I chose this picture. There were lots of pictures of people on mountains with their hands in the air, but I wanted you to see that everything in front of him is green. It is life. Sometimes in life we struggle with things, and all we can see is this cold, dead rock in front of us. It's an insurmountable obstacle. It's something that we cannot imagine living without. We can't imagine conquering that thing. But if we do, if we persevere, and if we keep our lifeline that we talked about that second week when we talked about watching the lead climber, if we keep our lifeline to our God, and if we keep our anchors, and you remember what those anchors were. Those anchors are things like coming to church on Sunday and worshiping, joining a group and helping other people. Jesus said, the food that I have to eat you don't know about, but the food I have to eat, the thing that sustains me, is to do the will of the Father. And so we know that our sustenance does not come so much from education, but it comes from learning what to do and then doing those things. That's where our spiritual food comes from. And so these are anchors, relationships with other Christians, all these things that Jesus told us to do, these are all anchors for us. And so if we keep our lifeline to the lead climber, which is Jesus, and that lifeline represents grace. If we keep that intact and we keep our anchors close, the closer the anchor, the safer you are. You might fall, but you won't fall far if you have those anchors in place in your life. And so everything in front of us, what Jesus desperately wants us to know is that everything is life. And the scripture actually says that Jesus is our life. When Christ, who is our life, appears, this is the Apostle Paul in Colossians, when Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him. Get that. When Christ appears, you appear with him. This is such an important thing. When Bill was telling his story a couple of weeks ago, or I was telling his story that he related to me, I told you, I said, Bill becomes, as he conquered his seemingly insurmountable obstacle, he became who he really is. He became the real Bill. He became more himself. And every time we conquer an obstacle in our lives, we become more the real us. We become more ourselves the closer we walk to Jesus. And when Jesus appears in our life, we appear with him. When he appears through something that we do, when we go and we feed the homeless, or we go and we help the boys at the Harris home, or whatever it is, when Sandy goes and visits someone in the hospital or takes a meal, she is becoming more herself because Jesus is appearing. He is appearing, and when he appears, we appear with him. Do not lose that concept. That is a beautiful thing. Then you also will appear with him in glory, and that glory is that victory. That is that beauty that comes when Jesus appears. And it says, so put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. And then he names some things: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And then he goes on. He said, on account of these, the wrath of God is coming. Now, I believe the wrath of God is coming. I believe that is a present tense thing. It's also a future tense, but it's a present tense thing. People are suffering. Some of us probably in this room are suffering right now because we have not been able to cut out or have refused to cut out some of those things in our lives. And we talked about that last week. If you were not here, go back and watch the video on the website. But it says, in these things you once walked when you lived in them, but now put them all away. Put them all away. Put anger away. Put wrath away, malice, slander, and foul talk from your mouth. Put those things away. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old nature with its practices and have put on the new nature, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. Now, let's just stop there. It says that we are putting off the old nature and we are putting on something new. Every time, every step that we take, every time that we conquer one of these obstacles, we are putting off the old person and we're putting on the new person. We are becoming more ourselves. We are becoming the person that God originally intended us to be, and that is a beautiful thing. It's and we put off those old practices and we put on something new. And this new thing, and this is just another scripture that says it in a different way, but it says, which is being renewed, this new nature is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. Who is the creator? It's Jesus himself. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and this is the only begotten of the Father. This is Jesus. We are being transformed. We are being conformed into the image of Jesus himself. And this is a very, very real thing. And most people go their entire lives and never know that. Most people go to church their entire lives and they have no idea who they are. Most people go to church their whole lives and they don't have this concept. They don't have any idea that God's original purpose was to turn us into the people that He created us originally to be, which are the sons and daughters of God, in that same type of power, with that same type of authority, with that same bloodline. You know, the bloodline, the son eventually moves into his father's place with all of his authority and all of that. And what he is doing is he is making us into his children, his real children, his bona fide sons and daughters. Okay, let's take a look at this picture again. The last thing I want you to know about this, and this was my one thing I was looking for whenever I looked for these pictures, is I wanted to see someone standing up there with their hands up. When I finished that 12-week program, that workout program, that last day I felt so victorious, and I raised my hands up, and it's just what you do naturally. You know, when somebody scores a goal, you know, boom, hands in the air, they're running, they're excited. This is the body language of victory, right? It is the body language of victory. Whenever we are victorious, we raise our hands. But this is also the body language of surrender. And you'll never, ever get to victory unless you first get to surrender. Now, Jesus knew about surrender. He knew a lot about surrender. He said, there's nothing that I can do of my own. He said, I can only do those things that I see the Father do. And he said to us, he said, a servant is not greater than his master. He says, as I have served you, serve others. As I have humbled myself, I want you to humble yourself and serve others. So surrender is something that Jesus knew about. And Jesus said this. He said, if anyone would come after me, if anyone would follow me, let him take up his cross and follow me. And Jesus took up his cross, but that's not the only thing that he did. Before he took up his cross, he was beaten. And this is something that I think we lose in Scripture. You really have to go to Isaiah 53 to really see what happened here when Jesus was beaten. The people who beat Jesus were not novices. They were experts. They were professionals. This is what they did for a living. They had their different tools that they used, the cat of nine tails, the canes, the different whips, and all these things that they used to beat him with. And he was beaten so bad that the Scripture says that he did not resemble, and you might think he was beaten so bad that he did not resemble himself. But that's not what the Scripture says at all. It says he was beaten so bad that he did not resemble a human. He did not resemble a human being. You could not look at him and say, oh, that's a human. He was beaten so badly he did not even resemble a human. That's what he did before he ever took up that cross. And there's a scripture in Isaiah 53 that said that he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, and the chastisement of our peace was upon him. The chastisement that brought us peace was upon him, and he endured that for us. And there's a scene in the movie, The Passion of the Christ. I don't know if you've seen that. It's kind of an older movie now, but there's a scene in The Passion of the Christ where Jesus is it's that scene where he's being beaten, and he's chained to this pole, and these guys that are beating him, they've beaten him so long now that they are out of breath, and they're winded, and they're tired, and then finally Jesus' body just collapses and falls on the ground. And you can see the relief in this scene in the movie. You can see the relief on these men on their faces as they breathe a sigh of relief, and they kind of back off like, we're done now. And they were taught and they were trained to beat a person within an inch of their life. As long as the person was still, had some strength left, they would beat them until it was down to that last little bit of strength to stay alive. And you could see that they were relieved that Jesus had collapsed. And then you see this. Jesus grabs the chains and he pulls himself back up to the post, as if to say to them, you're not finished yet. Jesus meant that he was going to have every ounce of our punishment, every lash, every blow. He was going to have every bit of punishment that belonged to us, and he was going to take that on himself. And I think that's such a great scene. It says so much. Without saying a word, it just says so much about the nature of Jesus. Then he took his cross, and he took it up and he carried it. This person who did not even resemble a human took his cross and he carried it to that hill, Golgotha. And most people think that's where the suffering began, when he was nailed to the cross. Then he was nailed to the cross. That's where he took our nails. After all this other stuff had happened, that's when he took our nails. And that's when he was crucified. Jesus knows a lot about suffering. He knows a lot about surrender. And he knows how it hurts to surrender. He knows how it hurts to deny ourselves. He's been there. He knows the pain. And so the key, and it's something that you can get used to, but the key is surrender. And that is when we enjoy the victory, is when we can lift our hands and surrender. Victory is not far behind. And if we can learn to do this, maybe we can learn this one thing that Jesus knows, that Christ knew, that none of us fully know, and that is the joy. Scripture says it was for the joy that was set before him that he endured the cross. I often wonder what kind of joy that is, that Jesus would endure all of that. What kind of joy was that? That caused him to continue down that path, just to the Scripture said he was set, his face was set like a flint toward Jerusalem. He was determined that he was going through with every bit of that surrender, every bit of that punishment. What was that joy like? My prayer is that when we all stand on the summit of our challenges, that we will begin to get a glimpse of that kind of joy that will spur us on and become the people that God has called us to be, that he has created us to be, that he has put in our spiritual DNA to become. That's my prayer.